On April 2000, a 22-year-old diving instructor named Yuri Lipski stepped off a beach in Egypt into calm, warm, turquoise water. He had roughly 10 minutes to live. Mounted on his head was a video camera. He did not die in a cave. He was not taken by a current, or an animal, or a failure of his equipment. The gear worked, and the recording proves it. What the tape shows is why it is still studied a quarter-century later, a trained diver being separated from his own judgment by something with no body, no sound, and no malice. At this site, his death was not an event. It was a rerun. His was the one that got filmed. The Blue Hole sits on the Sinai coast of the Red Sea, a few miles north of the town of Dahab. From the shore, it is a circle of deep blue inside the turquoise of the reef. A submarine sinkhole, more than 300 feet straight down, close enough to the beach that you can enter it without a boat. You park, you walk past a row of cafes, and you step in. How many divers have died at the Blue Hole in Dahab? Ask that question, and you discover the first disturbing fact. Nobody has an official answer, because no authority was ever assigned to count. Estimates assembled from the local dive community, recovery divers, and journalists range from 130 to 200 dead since records informally began. Take the middle of that range and spread it across the decades, and this one hole, a body of water you could swim across in about a minute, has produced roughly one death every season for 40 years, without pause. Set it against the mountains from earlier in this series. This hole in a beach has killed more divers than K2 has killed climbers. K2 requires 2 months, a permit, and a war with altitude. The Blue Hole requires a taxi. The dead are not beginners, either. That assumption fails here the same way it failed at 26,000 feet. The names on record include instructors, technical divers, military-trained swimmers, and a world-class safety professional we will come to. Divers call this place by a second name, and they do not use it as a joke: the Divers' Cemetery. And yet, on any given morning, the surface of the Blue Hole is crowded with snorkelers, families, children with rented masks, floating in the top 10 feet of a water column with a body count. The site's danger is not hidden behind distance or expense or difficulty of access. It is hidden behind something far stranger, and the camera on Yuri Lipski's head filmed it working. Illusion number 1, the entry. Almost every location in this series disguises danger behind infrastructure: cable cars, visitor centers, base camps. The Blue Hole does something more effective. It removes the journey entirely. The deadliest dive site on Earth, by every count anyone has attempted, has shore entry. There is no crossing, no descent to a trailhead, no expedition logistics that might force a person to confront what they are attempting. There are sun loungers. There are cafes serving mint tea within sight of the water. Camels stand on the beach for photographs. A diver gears up on a carpet, walks a few steps, and is floating over a 300-foot void while the smell of the grill is still in the air. Every cue a human brain uses to calibrate risk, remoteness, effort, hostility of surroundings reads holiday. The reef does the rest. The first 30 feet of the Blue Hole are genuinely, honestly safe, warm, and beautiful, which is why the snorkelers above are in no danger at all. The hole does not lie about its surface. It lies about its floor. Illusion number 2, the qualification. In 1997, 2 experienced Irish divers, Conor O'Regan and Martin Gara, they intended to dive deep. They did not come back, and their recovery would quietly change the site's history in a way that becomes this video's final chapter. The point of their case here is narrow. Certification is measured in dives logged and depths visited, and every diver who dies in the Blue Hole passed the same calibration everyone else did. The water does not check certification cards, because the thing that kills here, as we are about to see, does not act on skill. It acts underneath it. Illusion number 3, the shortcut in the wall. At about 180 feet down, the wall of the Blue Hole opens. A tunnel, the arch, runs about 85 feet through the reef and out into the open Red Sea, where the seabed falls away toward 400 feet. 180 feet. The ceiling of that tunnel sits as deep below the surface as the Leaning Tower of Pisa stands above the ground. From inside the hole, the arch glows, a window of brilliant sunlit blue at the end of a dark passage. It is one of the most photographed sites in technical diving, and it is an optical trap. Water strips away every reference your eyes use to judge distance. The glowing exit looks close, the passage looks short, the light looks like the surface. Divers describe the pull of it in the language of doorways, not depths. But the recreational limit for divers on ordinary air is 130 feet. The arch's ceiling is 50 feet below that line, and its floor and its exit slope away into far worse. The most beautiful thing in the blue hole is positioned precisely on the wrong side of the line where a diver's own mind stops being trustworthy. This is where the hole begins to kill. What waits below that line does not grab, does not crush, and never touches the body at all. It arrives through the bloodstream, and its cruelest property is this: it feels like good news. Every breath you take is mostly nitrogen, around 78%. At the surface, it is inert. It does nothing. Your body has carried it, chemically ignored, through every breath of your life. Under pressure, it stops being ignorable. At depth, the weight of the water column compresses the air a diver breathes. At 180 feet, a diver is absorbing nitrogen at more than 6 times the surface dose with every breath. And nitrogen under pressure behaves like something else entirely. It dissolves into the fatty membranes of nerve cells and begins acting on the brain the way an anesthetic gas does. Not metaphorically. The same class of physical effect that puts surgical patients to sleep. What is nitrogen narcosis, and why do divers call it the martini effect? Because the impairment is real enough to be measured in drinks. As a rule of thumb, every 30 feet past 100 adds roughly the effect of one more martini on an empty stomach while performing the most consequential task of your life. At the arch's ceiling, a diver on air is operating multiple drinks deep. At the depths beyond it, the comparison stops being useful. For the first decades of diving, nobody knew what this was. Divers reported euphoria, confusion, dread, tunnel vision at depth, and the effect was blamed on impurities in the air, on nerves, on the diver's character. The correction came in the late 1930s, when a U.S. Navy researcher named Albert Ben Key identified the culprit. Not contamination, not psychology, the nitrogen itself, under pressure. The gas every human breathes every second of their life becomes, past a certain depth, a mind-altering drug with no taste, no smell, and no warning label. And 2 properties make it lethal rather than merely dangerous. First, it does not build tolerance the way divers long believed. Experience does not immunize. The belief that it does is itself part of the trap. Second, and this is the mechanism inside the mechanism, narcosis impairs the very faculty that would detect narcosis. A drunk driver at least had the chance to count his drinks before the judgment faded. A narked diver's dose arrives after the judgment is already fading, deepening with every meter, and the impaired brain reports, with total sincerity, that everything is fine. The blue hole does not have to deceive anyone. It gets the diver's own mind to do it, from the inside, in the first person. Understand what separates this from everything earlier in this series. Mont Blanc's cold announces itself. You feel it taking you. K2's corridor at least lets you see the ice hanging over your head. Narcosis is the first killer in these files with no exterior at all. Nothing to see, nothing to feel arriving, no moment where the victim knows they are being attacked. The others kill you while you fight. This one kills you while you agree. Depth attacks from a second direction at the same time. Air itself becomes toxic. Below roughly 220 feet, the oxygen in an ordinary tank reaches partial pressures that can trigger convulsions. And a convulsion underwater is fatal in a way it is not on land. And the math of the gas supply collapses in parallel. A tank that lasts an hour near the surface lasts on the order of 6 or 7 minutes at 300 feet, because every breath down there is 10 times denser. Depth is attacks on everything at once: judgment, oxygen chemistry, and time. And it compounds per foot, which is why technical divers cross these depths on special gas mixtures, with staged tanks after specific training. On ordinary air, past the arch's ceiling, a diver is not equipped. They are simply falling slowly, with a license. Which forces the question this series keeps arriving at from new directions. If the mechanism is fully known, why does the blue hole keep killing people who could recite it? You now know what narcosis is, which should function as a vaccine. The blue hole's case files record the opposite. Divers who taught this exact material, descending past every threshold they lectured on, certain to the last meter that they were the exception. Yuri Lipski is 22 years old, Russian-born, living in Israel, and qualified as a diving instructor, young but not a novice, and not a stranger to this site. In the days before the dive, a local technical diver, a man whose name this video is saving, examined what Lipski intended to do and told him plainly, "A dive like that needs 2 weeks of preparation first." Lipski had a weekend. He went anyway. On April 28th, 2000, he enters the blue hole from the beach like every visitor before him. On his head is a video camera. From this point, the reconstruction has a property no other case in this series has had. It is not assembled from last photos and stopped signals. It is continuous. The camera runs and the depth gauge writes the timeline. The red line on our chart is his. 0 feet, entry, warm water, high visibility, the reef bright and ordinary. The descent that follows is fast, much faster than intended by every later analysis. Investigators believe a combination of factors took hold early: heavy weighting, a possible buoyancy problem, and a wall that offers almost nothing to arrest a sinking diver, because the blue hole's sides fall away sheer and smooth. What is certain from the tape is the direction and the speed. The red line does not wander. It plunges, past 130 feet, the recreational limit, within the first minutes. The dose curve you now understand is climbing with him as he falls. Every foot of depth is another fraction of a drink entering a brain that is trying to solve an emergency. Past 180 feet, the arch's ceiling. The window of blue light is somewhere in the wall beside him. He keeps descending. And here, the victim dignity rule governs what this video will and will not do. The footage exists publicly. It has been watched millions of times. This channel will not narrate a man's final minutes beat by beat. What the recording documents, stated clinically, is this. Twice on the way down, Lipski turns his dive computer to the lens. Its last reading on camera, 300 feet, nearly the height of Big Ben below the surface. Accounts place the floor he finally landed on as deep as 377 feet. There, the tape shows a diver kicking up a storm of silt, working his equipment in ways that make no sense for his situation, behaving, in the assessment of the technical divers who later studied the footage, like a man who no longer understands where he is or what is happening to him. The recording does not capture the end. It stops before he does. What it proves is narrower and worse. The gear functioned, the camera functioned, and the judgment was already gone. The following day, the man who had warned him, a Dahab technical diver named Tarek Omar, descends into the blue hole and brings Yuri Lipski back, a recovery from beyond 300 feet, itself a dive most professionals will never be qualified to attempt. The camera came up with him, still functional. The man who told him not to go was the man who carried him out. Hold his name. He is the final chapter of this video. The footage did not stay private. It reached the world and became the most watched diving fatality ever recorded, the clearest documentation of narcosis in existence, studied in dive briefings to this day. What it never became is a vaccine, because 17 years later, the pattern was still running. And the next case is the one that ends every remaining argument about experience. July 22nd, 2017. Alessia Zecchini, an Italian freediver and one of the greatest athletes in the sport's history, attempts to swim through the arch on a single breath of air. No tank, a discipline where narcosis and gas toxicity are held off by having no gas at all, only a human body and a clock. Supervising her attempt is Stephen Keenan, an Irish safety diver regarded as among the best in the world, a man whose entire profession is the last 30 feet of other people's dives. Zecchini crosses the arch, 10 seconds faster than they had planned. On the far side, at the meeting point, Keenan is not there. He is descending 20 seconds late for a reason nobody has ever explained. That 30-second gap is the entire disaster. By the time Keenan reaches the meeting depth, Zecchini has already lost the guideline to the surface and turned the wrong way in open water. And Keenan does exactly what his profession exists to do. He goes after her, finds her, and points her home. She survives. He does not. In the final 30 feet of his own ascent, the exact stretch of water his profession existed to guard for others, he blacks out. He is found at the surface, face down. He could not be revived. The rescue succeeds. The rescuer dies. It was the first recorded death of a safety diver in action in freediving history. What the documentary about that day did not have room to name is the pattern this file was already documenting, that the water did the same thing to a world-class safety diver that it had done to a 22-year-old with a camera. 2 decades apart, same mechanism, 2 disciplines, 2 decades. A 22-year-old instructor with a camera and one of the finest safety divers alive. Which leaves the question the depth chart cannot answer. Knowing everything you now know, why does anyone go past the line at all? Because at the blue hole, safety itself is the recruiting mechanism. Watch how it works. A diver visits the arch and survives. Most do. They tell the story. The story travels through dive shops and forums and logbooks. I did it at 180 feet. I did it on air. It was fine. The next diver arrives with that story installed, dives it, survives, and adds their own. Sociology has a documented name for this, and it did not come from diving. Normalization of deviance, named by the sociologist Diane Vaughan in 1996, in her study of why NASA kept approving the flawed design that destroyed the Space Shuttle Challenger. Each violation that fails to end in disaster becomes the new definition of safe, and the boundary creeps, one survived, exception at a time, until the exception is the norm, and nobody can point to the day the rules died. The pattern was given its name in 1996, after a spacecraft fell out of the sky. The blue hole had been running it on divers since the first fins entered the water, and here it compounds with the chemistry in a way no other location in this series can match. At Mont Blanc, the bias and the mountain were separate. The brain made the plan, the mountain punished it. Here, the substance doing the punishing is also editing the brain in real time. Normalization walks the diver to the line over months of accumulated survivor stories. Narcosis carries them over it in minutes, while assuring them, in their own inner voice, that they are fine. The hole doesn't hunt, it edits. And every survivor it releases swims back to shore carrying a slightly looser definition of safe, which the next diver will inherit as fact. The site's most effective advertisement has always been the people it let live. You have run this loop yourself. Every unpunished shortcut you now perform without thinking was, once, a violation you committed nervously and survived. Where were you the last time you were completely certain and completely wrong? Which leaves one thread deliberately unpulled. Twice now, this story has passed over the same quiet figure. The man who goes down and brings them back. It is time to meet him, and the place where all of this is written down. The blue hole doesn't drown you. It convinces you. One man has carried more of the blue hole's dead than anyone alive, and the place where their names end up is not a cemetery, not a registry, not a database. It is something you walk past on the way to the water. Why they crossed the line you now have. The definition of safe is rewritten socially at the surface and chemically at depth. Tarek Omar was a technical diver in Dahab in 1997 when Conor O'Regan and Martin Gahra, the Irish divers from the start of this video, failed to surface. It was Omar who went down and brought them back. He found them at 335 feet, locked together. In his own account, one had gone down after the other, likely trying to help. The first case Omar ever recovered from this hole was already the one this video would end on 20 years later. A rescuer who died going after the person he was trying to save. That recovery became a role, and the role became a life. For more than 2 decades, when a diver does not come up from the blue hole, it is Omar's phone that rings. Families calling a private individual, because no official service exists for what he does, and he has never charged them for it. He long ago lost count of the bodies he has carried up, from depths most instructors will never see, including a 22-year-old with a camera on his head, a man he had personally warned a weekend earlier. Dive journalists gave him a title that reads like folklore and is simple job description: the keeper of the blue hole. And the keeper will tell anyone who asks the pattern he keeps finding, and it is the single most disturbing verified detail in this file. The equipment he brings up is routinely intact and functioning. Lipski's helmet camera was designed to survive 245 feet. Omar lifted it off the floor at 377, over 100 feet past its rated failure point. It was still recording. The machines survive the dive. The mines do not. The blue hole's dead are not divers whose gear failed 9 stories down. They are divers whose judgment was switched off while the equipment kept offering to save them. And the record of all of it is on the cliff. Walk to the Blue Hole's entry point today, and you pass dozens of stone and marble plaques set into the rock face. Names, dates, ages in a half-dozen languages, bolted to the hillside feet from the cafes. O'Regan and Gahra are there. Stephen Keenan is there. It is one of the largest memorials to the dead of any single natural site on Earth, and it stands directly beside the entry steps. Close enough that divers gear up in its shadow, and snorkelers photograph it without slowing down. The warning is not hidden. It is the largest object on the beach. The site's entire cemetery is displayed at its front door, and the queue for the water forms next to it every single morning. The Blue Hole doesn't drown you. It convinces you. So if you ever stand on that beach, mask in hand, water warm, the circle of dark blue flat and quiet in front of you, read the wall before you read the water. Every name on it belonged to someone who was certain. Certainty is the first thing the hole dissolves, and it dissolves it so gently that every one of them would have told you, at 180 feet, that they had never felt more clear. Because notice what makes this site merciful by the standards of this series. It's dead come back. A man exists whose life's work is returning them. There is another place where this exact pattern repeats, except there, no one comes to carry the dead home because no one can. They lie where they stopped, beside the busiest path on the mountain, in the open, for decades. And the living walk past them, one by one, and use them as landmarks. That place is next.